So if we're going to talk typography for the web, we can kind of break this into two different camps. Why should you choose Aaron? Why should you choose a typeface?
Because typography says something about what you're saying.
I don't have to pay attention to all this. So yeah, we can break this down into two main camps. Why you're going to choose a typeface that you're going to choose, okay? And then how do you set type effectively for the written page? So again, most of you have already done this in the typography class. Those of you that have, how many of you have not taken the typography class yet? A couple of people. Okay. So hopefully this won't be too out of the realm for you guys. But in terms of roles, so let's talk roles of web type, and then how to pick a typeface for a genre, so on and so forth. And then we'll talk setting type, etc. So to keep this kind of short and simple, we have three different types of roles of typography on the web, or one could say in just books in general. Yes, my hair is on fire. This is, again, I like having my old whiteboard drawings as examples, so I don't have to draw this stuff up on the board any longer. And I get a kick out of my old whiteboard drawings, hopefully you do as well. So, but they can be, the type that we are then going to be using can be broken into three main camps. Header text. So what is header text? Header text is used to denote sections within a written document. The more significant the header, the stronger the visual presence should be, giving your headers a bit of style. Okay. So what is header text? What is the role of that? If we go to, I don't know, let's just use my business sites as an example. So might as well. So if we go to a typical blog article page, right? And again, it all really depends on the function of your page as well. So we're going to talk functionality of, I guess, two different types of pages. Your main or gateway destination sets of pages versus your kind of advertising doorway portal type page like a home page, right? So if we were talking headers in terms of, well, what is the function of headers in the world of typography? One could say, if we Google the F pattern Nielsen. Okay. So this is something that we will talk about in the Writing for the Web class as well. But has anybody ever heard of the F-shaped pattern? Did I mention it in the typography class at all? A little bit? Maybe not? Okay. Well, if you're talking about what the F-shaped pattern is, so remember when I was talking about eye tracking? Was I talking about? I have no idea what I'm talking about in any given class most of the time.
Writing for the web.
Yeah, you took Writing for the Web, didn't you? Yeah. Okay, and Jonathan, you took Writing for the Web. Like I said, there are a lot of theories, principles, concepts that kind of overlap here and there. But generally, what the F pattern is how we read a typical page. So if we, for instance, do a Google search, and the Google search is 960 responsive grid. And that's what I type in. And I go, oh, that looks like a good article right there. Then I would come to this web page. See how I saw my article I clicked on? Okay. So if I came to this page, where am I? Right. How do I know that what I just clicked on, right? So how do things function from, let's say, an environment of what I consider to be a landing page environment, right? So definition of what a landing page is. To me, I consider a landing page being that page that you enter the entry points into a website via a Google search. Is that how everybody understands landing page? Right? Okay. So if that were the case, then because I'm looking for, I've typed in keywords, 960 responsive grid. Okay. So as I'm going through then the Google search machine, I come down to unsemantic CSS framework. Why is that there? Right? Has nothing to do with it. Right? So I skip on. What I'm doing is then I'm looking for the keywords that I just put in there. 960 grid responsive. Right? So if I then click on that and I go to a landing page, I am going to be using then the F pattern to see if, am I in the right page? So think about context, right? When you guys are doing a Google search and you type in whatever you type in, and you're just like, I'm not reading all this stuff, I'm just looking for keywords, that looks great, click, and I go to a website, right? So you think to yourselves, or just kind of similar with navigation, you want something to hold onto, right? You want to know that you are in the right place, that you are not wasting that 2 seconds of your time that you're never going to get back, right? So what you typically do is look at where this is starting, right? So this up here, and again, for those of you at home that are watching this online, is it still recording, Mark? Okay. So remember when we talked about the sections of the web page? Branding up top, navigation, content, main content, supplemental content, footer, right? So typically, we kind of have banner blindness for the header. So if Tosha, I asked you, where are you? And you say Premium Design Works because you looked at the logo. You're actually really saying Premium Design Works because you've been here before, right? Meaning that you're already familiar with that logo, right? But if you were looking at an article out there on the interwebs because you typed in whatever, you would have a tendency, I would think, and this is a lot of what I stand up here and talk about is my own usage and patterns of my own usage because I'm a human and I was just getting into it.
No. I went to it. I was looking at Reddit's
web
design page and they wanted to show off the cool 404 page and then it made noise.
Sorry. I worked at Nintendo way back in the, that wasn't Nintendo.
No, it was Pac-Man.
That was what? Sorry. Well, one way, shape, or form, we have a tendency to ignore the banner and the logo up at the top when we were doing this to start out with. Okay? What we typically do, and this is what is proven by these eye tracking studies, is that, again, this quadrant, again, for those of you at home, this quadrant right here is the quadrant that we look at first. So kind of what I'm saying, Tosha, is that if I'm here, what I read first is this. Straight away what I'm going to. Then I go up to, if I need to, the logo and the navigation, if I feel like I need to go somewhere else. Now, if I click on this at a landing page, or click on the search engine results and go to a landing page, and I've read this headline. Am I in the right place? Possibly. I'm not convinced, right? Think about how you guys use the web. I'm not convinced. This headline could say, convert a 960 grid website layout to a responsive design, and then just be filled with clickbait advertisements, right? That wants to tell us 25, oh, you have to see these 25 photos that you just won't believe, right? How many of you go to websites because you read a clickbait headline that's kind of interesting, and you go and then you're like, oh my God, there's nothing here on this page, right? Or is that just me?
I find that phenomenon personally fascinating.
Really?
I do. I mean, they know all of the right, like, poorly taken photos to
Yes.
draw people's interest.
Exactly, exactly. They know who I am, where I've been, they know how to tug at my heartstrings and whatever else. We won't go into it too in-depthly, right? Especially because we're recording it. But one way, shape, or form, I will have a tendency to read the headline, and in this case, there's a photo. I can kind of skip through the photo, and next, I will then read here. So how we typically do that then with the F pattern is we will read the main headline, we will possibly read the summary in there, and then from there, we'll skip headline to headline to see if, okay, well, am I interested in reading this whole article? Or context, right? Or am I just looking and using keywords to search for that one answer that I'm searching for? I need that answer. Again, we're on, you know, we're playing the game Answer Quest, I guess, for all practical purposes. So what we would have a tendency to do is, great, this headline has gotten my attention. Or I don't like saying, even though I just used the phrase get your attention, got my attention, let's not think of it in terms of getting your attention, because a screaming baby on an airplane gets your attention, right? But does that screaming baby on an airplane keep your attention? That can be a discussion all of itself. But what I mean by that is, does this article then have the necessary things? In other words, if I then start going headline to headline, jumping down headline to headline, to find then the sub metadata, let's say, beyond my search of what I'm looking for, does this article then have the answer that I'm looking for? Well, that's kind of a rhetorical question at this point in time, but if we're using this F pattern, we then skip from headline to headline to then read those other associative keywords to see, again, we're satisficing all over the place. Navigation isn't necessarily great. I have something in a main menu and I click. Navigation is keywords all the way through the website to, has anybody ever heard the term information sent? Okay. What information sent means to me is somebody's cooking brats. I like brats. Where is it? I can smell it, right? Where is it? And I might go walking around from house to house to ask for free brats because I had brats this weekend. That's just what came to me, right? So same thing. We are looking for the answer via our information sent. So we are then reading headline by headline, not paragraphs, but headline by headline to see if those keywords has the information sent to answer our questions, right? So therefore, role of web type, header text. Should add meaning for the visitor, should strengthen your design, create a sense of hierarchy. Headers could be a strong color from your palette, limited short lines of text, bigger size than the body copy. So, add meaning for the visitor. Does this add meaning for the visitor? One could argue, well, what does meaning mean, right? We can get pretty meta like that. But if it does it add meaning to the visitor, is it functioning appropriately to what we are trying to accomplish? I have keywords. I put those keywords in the search machine. I see those keywords here. My information sent says to me, hey, this possibly is the right article. So therefore then, same thing. I can go one to the next. In terms of a sense of hierarchy, right? Sense of hierarchy, what we mean by that is pretty much the fact that this is an H2, right? So in here, I am along the lines of, have you guys heard the arguments of whether you should use an H1 for your logo or not? You remember those 3 arguments from typography? What were they, Jonathan? Isn't this fun? This is just a review of the typography class. Huh?
I know it's like review.
Should you use an H1 for your logo or not?
Didn't we say it can kind of depend?
One camp says no.
Right.
One camp says this is your H1.
Yep.
One camp says no. This is the master title of your whole website, Premium Design Works. So that's the H1. A third camp says no. Both of you are stupid, right? You should use an H1 only on your homepage for your logo. Now, we could split hairs all day about that. One of the theories says, well, use an H1 here because of search engine optimization. I have just used an H2 there, and my search engine optimization is just fine, disproving that theory, right? So I'll leave it up to you whether, me personally, I don't care if you use an H1 for your logo or not. I don't have that strong of an opinion because I've done it both ways, and both ways work fine, and it's, to me, it's sort of, hey, make your way through this world and you figure it out, right? But what I can tell you is, if my logo is an H1 and this is an H2, then these being H3s, it should function like objects, right? So, in terms of a hierarchy, for those of you at home, I'm drawing up on the board, and I'm not going to switch it to camera view for up on the board. But if this is my H2, this is an H3, that's an H3, this is an H3, so on and so forth. Our headline should represent that visual hierarchy, because what are we saying? Well, this is what this is all about. This is a subsection. Or these are subsections. Within those subsections, there are even tertiary sections. All of them then, in other words, these 2 bits of information are under this camp. These 2 bits of information are under that camp, so on and so forth. What does this remind you of? Close. I mean, yes. It's a Roman numeral outline. So, Jonathan, because you took, so if we do it like this, notice how I'm numbering this, Jonathan. Uh-huh. What am I doing?
From right from the web.
Uh-huh.
This is the.
So it's a Roman numeral outline.
Yeah.
What am I actually doing? Also known as information architecture. Sorry, I'm scared. Yes, right? So basically what we are doing is what's the answer in Mike's head? Somebody say it before he freaks out. So if we have our typical node link diagram, right? Again, this is where, welcome to the matrix, right? Welcome to the barbershop mirrors. How far into so if I'm here, right? These are the categories and subcategories of the entire website. These are then the categories and subcategories of said page, right? So to me, it's, you don't stop the organizational schema. It's how far down you want to go. So when we went and talked writing for the web, right? Then what's in here? Maybe paragraph 1, 2, and 3, right? Who remembers diagramming sentences back in grade school? How far into the matrix do you want to go is kind of what I'm saying. So therefore, the function is, especially if we get into, if I go into, let's see, this one in particular that has the H2, the H3, H3, H4, H4, paragraph, paragraph. So what we talk about in the writing for the web class is each one of these things is an object with a set of objects with a set of objects with a set of objects, right? Kind of like one of those little Russian nesting dolls, okay? So therefore, our, let's say it like this then. Looking at this hierarchy, can you delineate the H3 from the H4? Yes. As you are reading through as well, but if they were black and not a strong color from your palette, you still get a sense of hierarchy, but it's not as pronounced, it's not as dramatic, it doesn't function as properly as it should, correct? So in terms of header text then, this is what we mean by add meaning for the visitor, strengthen your design, create a sense of hierarchy, should be a strong color from your palette, right? So my Premium DesignWorks palette, black and red. Well, red is the strongest color. What about if we had a palette like purple and gold? This is where we can kind of say, well, what's the dominant color and what are the subservient colors, right?
Most readable, but yellow would be less.
Exactly. Everything comes into context, meaning, or everything comes into play. In other words, why should you do this? Well, in this case, for these reasons. In this case, for these reasons, right? Now, we can have common sense reasons that encompass all of it, but ultimately it is going to come down to why did you use purple instead of yellow, right? It might come down to why did you use blue instead of orange? Why did you use red instead of green, right? Well, in this case, yeah, if we had yellow as these headlines, let's see, what is the yellow? What is the yellow? it's long, we might not even see it as a headline, right? One could argue that, well, hey man, purple the same thing. Purple almost looks like black. So what can help in this situation?
Tertiary colors.
Possibly, or a little bit of size, I would say, right? So between color, Mary, you said font, correct? Yeah. Between color, size, and font, you have to choose an appropriate balance of ratio of headers to body copy, and then headers to headers, right? So I would argue that, yeah, I did this incorrectly there. That's not really that big or correct as a hierarchy. This looks like, you know, but in terms of what I've done here, I would argue that, yeah, readable. It's again on brand, right? So I'm using Arial because, again, Arial is my typeface of choice. Does it need to slap you upside the face to make you say, whoa, that's cool? No, it has to function, right? But in terms of then lastly, header text, limited to short lines of text. Well, how short, how long? It's all relative, right? I would argue. Well, let's ask you this. Too long, too short, just right?
It's long, but it's necessary.
Correct. So it functions correctly. Given all the variables of necessity, meaning, well, I have to make that headline keyword dense to function for search engine visibility or search engine optimization. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 important words, right? If you're up to 12 words, maybe that's a bit too long. See if you can say what you need to say for a main headline like that in, you know, 7-ish words is kind of what 7 plus or minus. And I'm not counting words like without, a, in, is, that kind of stuff. I'm talking keyword type words. Does that make sense? Okay. But again, it's all relative. The thing that really does count then is when you are viewing it on a phone. So this is why in typography, or let's say it like this. What's the rule for type size to lettering in body copy? My rule is the rule. What's the rule? What's the ratio?
1624.
Okay, so if we said 16 over 24, that equals 2/3 or 1 over 100 over 150, right? So again, have you, those of you that are watching this at home, have you noticed that I've just stopped caring about you? Because I'm writing on the board, I'm not even pointing at things, right? I'm recording this just because you guys want me to, not because I want to. But yeah, so size to leading, right? In other words, type size to leading, meaning space from baseline to baseline. What is leading in the web world?
Space from baseline to top line.
What line height was the definition or the name? Okay, so take a look at this headline then, because you know as well as I do that when you're looking at articles, how many of you read blog articles on your phone? right?
I get like a quarter in and then I'm just too sick of looking at type on my
Fair enough.
phone. Yeah.
But,
Those are inherently not very useful. Little arches.
yeah, true. But let's say it like this. How many of you are, again, I'll just go with my, with my world because I'm the teacher, I get to make the examples, right? So if I'm, looking at Facebook on my phone, right? And again, entry point into articles that I read on the interwebs, right? Typical feed that then I click on a news article to then read on Huffington Post, Vox, whatever other New York Daily News, Washington Post, LA Times, New York Times, you name it. So I have to read the headline. And so often, if I'm on my phone, the width is very narrow. So I may have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines. So therefore, if I went with the same rules of size to leading or size to line height, too much space? I think so. Right, so this is kind of getting into the setting type for the web that we were talking about in the typography class. So what I typically do for then in terms of functionality for the headlines is, here's 100, we just saw 150. I like 125. So for body copy, 1/150. For headlines, 1/125 typically. That's what I do. Getting back to the bullet list here. So header text, right? Lastly on the list is strengthen your design, right? All these this bulleted list is, I believe, out of the original books that I chose for this class, the CSS Eden Garden or the Transcending CSS books that are just kind of not really worthy to get at this day and age, but in terms of bullet points to start a conversation from, perfect, right? Strengthen your design. So what that means to me is branding, right? What is your brand? So if you guessed it, here I go. I'm more sick of it than you, but it's still a good example, right? So they told me to use Gotham Black. So Gotham Black for the headlines, right? So again, a lot of it is also branding. We just look at my website. Phil Tip Roman. Branding. Again, I wanted my school website here. The concept behind my school website, again, was a compromise between traditional wireframes and my whiteboard drawings, right? So I wanted to emulate as best I could. Don't laugh when I say this, because I know your thoughts on this. I wanted to emulate the best I could my writing of the whiteboard. So where did I succeed in that?
Background's white. Can you use any writing font?
Felt tip Roman. What I'm trying to get at is I'm trying to get somebody to bust me on on my handwriting sucks.
Yeah, it has got the, like, your actual handwriting, it's a lot more legible.
Yeah.
That's okay.
In other words,
Silence you got in reaction to the questions.
yes, yeah. I was just like, come on, say it, man, say it. I know my handwriting, I write quickly on the board, so I wanted something that looked like the markers. And because one time when I said, you know, I chose that typeface because it looked like my handwriting on the board, I had one person in the back go, ah! Right? And that's kind of what I was looking for. But yeah, so I have a tendency to write in all uppercase caps instead of title case. But one way, shape, or form, my wireframe then from a branding design standpoint is again supposed to be a compromise between my wireframe documents or my original wireframes that were like what I drew in the tutorial, just normal black and white, right? So I stylized my wireframes with my whiteboard drawing kind of gimmick, if you want to say gimmick. That's a good word for that, kind of a gimmick, to expand a brand or to create a brand for myself, okay? So you will then, and we'll get into choosing a typeface here in a little bit. But, so that's header text. Any question on header text, right? Again, most of you have heard a lot of this before. Then we have body text, okay? So in terms of body text, body text is the text that will make up the majority of your editorial content and should, first and foremost, follow the principles of readability. Readability, 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 okay? One could argue that, or let me just ask it like this. How many of you feel like I'm pushing the lines of readability here? With what we talked about in the, yeah. I should possibly maybe even go to, on my paragraph tags. No. No. Oh, there it is. No. Body. Right? It's not going to look right. I'm not going to be able to recreate it very well here. Well, let's say it like this. In terms of readability, what are the principles that make something readable or not? Okay, so one of the tenets of readability is paragraph should be kept to a line length of approximately, this is one rule from one book, 66 plus or minus 10 characters. What does that really mean? I say for line length in body copy here, I wouldn't go over 80 characters per line, right? If you're pushing into the 70 to 80 range, that's where you should start to question it, right? But if we just go back to this article, right? In terms of body copy, let's go to a place where there's not a whole lot of screenshot. Readable, yes or no? Readable enough. That's a good answer, right? One could argue, you know, you might want to bump that up from 16 pixels to 18 pixels. Fair enough. I've had that discussion with myself. What's kept me from doing it?
16 is kind of standard.
Or the fact of just having to do it. In other words, the return on investment. How much time would it take me to redo a whole lot of stuff versus the what would I get out of it?
A bunch of stuff. Aren't you usually setting these things by hand?
Yeah, but then I would have to reassess. If I changed one piece of typography, I'd have to reassess how all the typography sits together. And with my OCD, taken all summer long.
So if you change the body text, then you have to probably change like the headers. And
Correct, correct. Because if I made the body text bigger, then in relation to the headlines in the hierarchy, that's what I'm saying, I would have to make those bigger, which I would then have to readdress the column size in which it sits, so on and so on and so forth. Okay, does that make sense to you? That's the tipping dominoes of the OCD that I don't want to get into. Because if I adjusted one thing without adjusting everything for an overall balance, right, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. Right.
A little bias subject there in that if you had the text bigger, you would enlarge the column.
Possibly.
Yeah, is that 100% necessary? At what point do you start considering that? When you're working with
That's what I'm saying. It's all relative. And that's what I'm saying. Like, to me, it's not just as easy as make this from 16 to 18, because I would have to take everything else into consideration in terms of, well, body copy size to relationship of my byline to my navigation items to all of it. That's what I'm saying to me, right? But I've kept this at 16/24 because on a desktop, it's relatively readable. On a phone, it's relatively readable. So it's readable enough, in other words. Would it cause you to not read this? Would it cause you to come to this article and for you to say, wow, I can't stand reading that?
It's not prohibited.
Right. So if we went to, again, Wikipedia, readability, right? And then we did this. How's my video doing over there?
Great.
Video is doing great. How readable is this body copy?
What?
Right.
I need to put on my glasses here.
Right.
It's not
I need to
readable.
put on my glasses and I don't need to wear glasses.
Right. So kind of what I'm saying is, those of you that were not in typography class, when it comes to readability, to me, then yes, 66 plus or minus 6, whether you want to say no more than 80, whether you want to say between 50 and 80, however you want to slice it, right? One way, shape, or form, if I'm reading in 1889 in Russia, blah, 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 blah. Holy shit, what line was I on? Right? So therefore, the be kept to a line length, right? That's where then, well, if I have 16/24 as my body copy, that's where then it is sitting in a eight columns here on the grid, right? So if I'm using the 960 grid, 8 columns, I am having my copy sit in the 620 column width. So if my body copy was sitting in a column width of 780, to keep that within the character limit, I would then definitely need to bump up point size or type size and also leading to go along with it. Does that make sense to the two of you that, again, all of you that have been in type, right? This is pretty much review for you guys so far, right? At least is it sort of interesting review? Okay. Never hurts to review this stuff, right, Dana? Okay, good. have plenty of contrast between the text and the background. So this is where I say go with at least the 70% rule. Okay, meaning whoops, that's not what I meant. Although that is funny. Game of Thrones grayscale. I meant the, let's see, 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Okay, so black, so 0% black, 10% black, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100% black. What's my question, Mark?
How much contrast?
How much more black could it be?
None.
None more black is the answer. One person. One person. What's the album's name?
Smell the blood.
Smell the Glove. Anybody? Anybody? If you do not know what I'm
That's
talking
his
about,
Spinal Tap reference.
right? I was going to say, if you do not know what I'm talking about, you absolutely need to go watch that movie. Okay. But what I'm saying is, if we have 80 or 70 sitting over white, that is still going to be readable. If we have 100% black sitting over 30, that is still going to be readable. If we have 100% black sitting over, that is not going to be readable. If we have 40% black sitting over white, that is not going to be readable. Okay, so this gets to the term value. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Right. So if and when you took a color picture and you changed that picture to black and whites, the term value is represented in this grayscale like this. When you turn red into a black and white world, red will change itself to about 90% black. All my photographers know what I'm talking about, right? So even if you are doing something like contrast, is it enough? Okay, so if you took this screenshot right here, and I'm not going to open up Photoshop and convert it to a black and white world, but if I took a screenshot of that and I opened it up in Photoshop, converted it to black and whites, would there be at least a 70% value contrast? Probably not. Thereby, that to me is my rule on readability. So value in terms of colors, how dark or how light they are. Similar to the definition that we had in the typography class of color, right? How dense the type is darker color. How loosely it is lighter color. So that's where definitely think in terms of the contrast value, right? So if we went and looked at and you thought to yourself, well, I don't want to always have black text over a white background. You're not alone, because that can start to look boring, right? So if we have black text over a what looks to be about a 20% value, right? That's an 80% contrast value. Yay! What about over here? Well, look at that, they added subpages. Brain injury. You're not supposed to add a fourth level page, because now I have to figure out the CSS. What are you guys doing to me? Damn you. Even when your wife is managing a website. Right? I love you, sweetie. This is on tape. I love you.
Oh.
I love her, Mark. I do. She's awesome. But I don't know.
Is that even a text box? Oh, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah. So what I'm saying about is, what about the navigation over here? Or what about this over here?
There's navigation. Oh, glasses. No.
If I designed this, what about my contrast over there?
It would probably be a lot more contrasty.
Again, function. Does this need to be readable in a paragraph? No, no, it does not. It is what we're calling accent text. So it needs to be functional in terms of, I see it, and how do we use sub-navigation a lot? If we're on a desktop, we might hover over it. We can also see that this is the "you are here" state, right? So that maroon over top of the background, again, has the contrast ratio that we're looking for. Same thing with the headlines. So it's a dominant color of the palette, right? And I'll use this one as an example in terms of the color palette and how to make an extended color palette next week, right? But that leads me into, one last thing. So I have plenty of contrast between text and background. Do not use odd colors or underlines unless it is a link. Do not all of a sudden put pink text in the middle like we were doing in the WordPress class, right? Do not ever, ever, ever underline a word if it is not a hot link in your body copy, right? Making 3 out of the 5 paragraphs red does not make them more important. One word makes it more important, but if it's an odd color, people are going to confuse it as a hyperlink. Does that make sense? Okay. So accent text. Accent text can be found in sidebars, navigation, block quotes, captions, spotlights, okay? So accent text is usually set apart from the main content that is being read. It is used to call attention away from body text for special purpose. It is generally text that is used in, again, sidebars, navigation, block quotes, captions, spotlights. So that's where I was saying that because this over here is considered accent text, it does not need to adhere to the same exact rules as body copy because it has a different function. I need to be able to see that there is indeed navigation over there. That's its purpose. And then when I go and look at the navigation, one can argue, well, Mike, I can't really read that as well. Okay, fair enough. But it's also not the only way of navigating through the website. It also does not detract from the body copy. Right? So whether you're with me or against me on this, right, all I'm saying is that this does not have to adhere to the same readable standards, right? It has to function differently, and it's up for interpretation. And as long as somebody can actually use it the way it is intended, it is functional, okay? Accent text should use shorter line lengths, be limited to only a few lines, not interrupt the flow of body text. Rather, it should enhance it. So if we have sidebars, navigation, block quotes, captions, and spotlights, that's a lot of, wow, accent text is a really big camp, is it not? Right? So if we look at this graphic then, header text, logo, main headline, subheadline, subheadline. What is accent text? Well, could be your spotlight typography. It could be your link text in your sub-navigation. It could be your block quote over here in your sidebar. It could be a block quote that's actually inside the body copy, right? It can also be a hyperlink, right? It has a different function and readability. Does that make sense? So again, what are you going to do in terms of choosing a typeface with accent text? Well, again, how does it function? If it's navigation in terms of navigation over here, sidebar navigation, I would argue that it needs to be very legible. What's the difference between legible and readable? Typography students.
I feel like legible means like it can have an artistic flair to it,
It can have an artistic flair to it.
but it's not like a large body of content.
That's the thing, not a large body of content. It can have a bit of an artistic flair, whether it has one letter turned around, remember Derby, right? Or one word turned around, whether it's a little bit more of a display typeface, right? This has to be readable, this paragraph has to be readable because I'm reading all those words in paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. If I look over here in the sidebar, these 3 words, I have to be able to make out those 3 words and only those 3 words at a time, right? So they have to be legible, okay? If we're talking about a spotlight, right? This is where, again, this is relatively readable, but if I used this typeface, this font over here, in paragraph form, after paragraph, after paragraph, after paragraph, the quirkiness, the creativeness of that typeface would wear under readability. Does that make sense? But because it's a short line length or a short piece of text, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words plus a couple of, what do you call those? Prepositions. Conjunction, junction, right?
That's your function.
That's your function. This is still legible. So it can be that quirkier branded typeface because it doesn't need to be read paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. Therefore, it fits into the, why did I pick that type, piece of type, right? It fits into the then, so let me just ask you this. In terms of header text, right? Like I said, things can be broken into 2 camps. What is the function of this text? And then how do you set type, right? So the one last thing that we didn't talk about setting type, let me go back to that quickly because I forgot to talk about that. Rules of setting readable type. So let's open up this graph. Okay. So when we get to Illustrator, all of you remember the space before, space after, what we were talking about? So those of you that don't know what space before, space after might be. Anatomy of setting type. So again, here's leading, right? From baseline to baseline to baseline, right? Or line height in the web world. Space after and space before. So instead of adjusting leading overall to move things up and down, in other words, if this were a headline here, the leading from there to there is 32 and the leading from there to there is 16, while everything is a general 14. Well, I would still leave things a general 14, and instead of adjusting this leading and that leading, I would do it differently. I would adjust space before and space after. Does that make sense as a concept? So in Illustrator, how do you do it? In the World Wide Web or in HTML, CSS, how do you do it? Let's talk about how you do it in CSS first. So if I were to inspect this headline, this H3, margin bottom, 6 pixels, space after. Padding top, 8 pixels, space before. Does that make sense? Okay. Who remembers why I use padding top instead of margin top? Collapsing margins. Has anybody ever figured out what collapsing margins are actually good for? Not one person? Me neither.
Confusion. They're good for.
Who is the one that implemented that? I'd like to sit down and have a beer with that person so I can throw it in their face.
Rude.
Yes, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
So, person who developed collapsing margins, if you're listening to this video, I want to have a beer with you so I can throw it in your face. I do. I will not back away from that statement. So therefore, in the Illustrator world, then, in Illustrator, to do the space before and space after, we have in our handy dandy little paragraph palette over here, space before and space after that we can adjust when doing our paragraphs, okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. Choosing a typeface. Again, why would we want to choose one typeface over another? Well, we have different criteria that we may want to address. Right? Branding. Using a typeface consistent with the typeface of the logo and the brand of the company. Hey, you want me to use Papyrus because you're a yoga instructor? Great. That sounds good to me. Readability. Choosing a typeface in order for it to be easily read in a paragraph. Emphasis. Choosing a typeface for visual punctuation. And lastly, display. Using a typeface to express emotion. Right? So, here are the examples that I used to link to in CSS Garden. And of course, now the links do that, and I haven't changed them. So I have to go look manually for them. Because Mark hasn't updated it yet.
Mike?
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Yeah.
Son of a bitch.
At least that wasn't the first time it's done it. That's not too bad.
Yeah, it's still, they need to fix it. And I've sent them need reports.
Now you're facing the camera. Now the camera.
I'm waiting for, I'm looking at that. Is that still, because
It's the camera.
yeah, but I hit, so it should change back to the screen here in a second. Share.
Yep.
Okay.
Here it is.
I'm watching it over there too. So in terms of brand, like we were saying, right? If my logo is Arial Black, I'm going to use a version of Arial, right? If my logo has Franklin Gothic in it, I might use a version of Franklin Gothic. If Jet City Improv tells me our branded typeface is Gothic something, what was it? I can't remember. Gothic Black, thank you. I'm going to use that and then forget what it is and ask my students, right? What was the typeface you used in the King logo? But it was a decent enough typeface, a nice enough typeface that it spoke what the word, it spoke what the brand was, but it was also functional enough to use in headlines, right? Unlike, like I said, using papyrus or fajita or something like that wouldn't be very usable. Okay. Worded. So here, this then isn't necessarily branding, right? Because nobody gave you a logo that you have to adhere to. But then you have to use a typeface that fits within a genre. So this is why I still like using the CSSN garden. So again, this is an appropriate use of the typeface stencil because stencil is very commonly associated with military. Right? Appropriate. It adds meaning to the visitor. It says Army. Genre that fits in a period of time, kind of the retro, right? I don't know what typefaces these are, but they all look like classic 45s, right? So along with the artwork of the stars, the kind of retro stars, and the typefaces, overall, fantastic branded design or genre design, correct? So on and so forth. Uh-oh. Limited font choices. What? Now, in this class, you are welcome to use the Google Font API if you want to. You're welcome to use Typekits. But how many of you were successful with your @FontFace doing that typography class, right? So again, what we used to be limited to were the typefaces that were packaged with our PC operating system or Windows operating system and the Mac operating system. So when you choose a font to use on your website, what it does to start out with is it looks for that font in the operating system folder. If it exists, it uses it. If it doesn't exist, it has to use something else. Okay? So therefore, that's where in the type class, we went over using then the @FontFace selector. So this is where, how many of those of you, have you used it before? Yep. I can't remember your name. Nico's friend. What's your name again?
Katie.
Katie. Have you used the @FontFace selector?
Nope.
Nope. So it's one way of then using a CSS selector at font face to then use a property font family. You give it essentially a variable name, right? And then you say source, you put it in a fonts folder or whatever folder, and you then point to it on your server with the type. Then from there, so if I said at font face Arial standard black, then I could say all H2s would use Arial standard black, and it would go dig into the font folder.
And it doesn't have to worry about whether or not their computer has a font.
Correct. So therefore, what it's doing is, instead of accessing it from your system folder, it's accessing it from your server.
Kind of like a font swirl or something.
Yeah. And that's where Font Squirrel has really cracked down on you generating them, but you should be able to use any open type and true type.
Okay.
Right? Okay. Like I said, is that a good sort of recap on the typography stuff, Jonathan? Of, hey, great, I took the typography class as a first quarter student. Now I'm a second quarter student, even though you've been here for like 7 or 8 quarters, right? Feels like it, yeah. But I'm done talking if you guys are done having me talk. Do I have any questions? That was a decent recap of typography, and oh yeah, that's the crap I have to do. For those of you that, yeah? I like that. Thank you, Star. You're such a star. Great. Well, I'm going to turn off my recording and go get a sandwich because I am super hungry. And I will leave Mark in charge, and I will be back.
Surprise.
Surprise. So yeah, great. Okay, I'm glad you guys just said let's get on with that lecture, and then Wednesday will be open lab. And sorry I haven't gotten to your sitemap information architecture stuff yet, but you know.
What?
It's okay.
No complaints.
That's what happens when you're sick. You fall behind, right?
Do you have a preference as far as what we use to build the sitemap? Does it have to be Illustrator, or can you like do a comp or anything?
It's fine. Just when you get into doing the wireframes, I would prefer that you, in this class, did the Illustrator route because that's part of the curriculum I'm trying to teach you, right? But then after that, you can choose to use it or not.
Had any success